All right, well, thank you all for being here. To be honest, I was shocked at church attendance today, and I'm even more shocked at Bible study attendance. This is fantastic. That's why I only printed 15 copies. So this is good news.
Does somebody need one?
Yeah.
But I can look on with Lenny too.
Well, I can look on with him, so.
Fine, whomever wants to
Sign
look on
one
with
down.
whomever.
Pass them down.
Quit fighting all the time.
I can look at
We
it.
should not be fighting in church.
Really? Man. Life is hard enough fighting over paper. All right, lesson 1, translations, traditions, and trouble. So, as I said, we did this with the men's group, probably been 5 years or so ago now. A study that Northwest Publishing put out. Joel Seifert, he's a pastor, I think, in Montana now. Or,
Good name.
I think he's in Montana. Anyway, he was a classmate of mine in college, and real bright guy, and he put this together, and I think he did a nice job. These sayings in the Gospels that sometimes you hear and you say, how does that work? You know, that doesn't seem right. So then you got to kind of talk about translations and the original language and what's the same context, and is it an issue with the translation? Is it an issue with my brain that I need to say, okay, Jesus, I maybe need to say you're the boss and I'm not, and if this is the way it is, then this is the way it is. Maybe sometimes it's a combination of both. So we'll get into it here, and we'll take this through the end of August, and then we're going to pick up Ecclesiastes, we said, after we're done with this. So meaningless. Everything's meaningless. Let's get into it. Jesus was a teacher. Today, I guess we didn't see him teaching as much, but remember, right before that, that's all he'd been doing is teaching. He was in the boat, and the crowd was around the shore, and he was telling parables and teaching, and the kingdom of heaven is like this, and the kingdom of heaven is like that. The crowds realized as they hung on his every word and drank in his parables that that's what he was. And even his enemies realized that, even if they sneered when they called him teacher. Speaking in beautiful sermons, using parables and illustrations, he taught people the truths of heaven that he came to fulfill on earth. He spoke his truths to be understood. That was the point of the parables, right? Heavenly story with an earthly story with a heavenly meaning, excuse me. Psalm 119, the unfolding of your words gives light. It gives understanding to the simple. List a couple of your favorite sayings of Jesus and why they are dear to you. And then the second question, think of some difficult ones and what makes them difficult.
Oh, I am with you always, even to the end of the earth.
That's a good one or a difficult
Why is
one?
it important to me? Because
Okay.
I really need him sometimes. And then to have that comfort, that I may be in a turmoil or flux or whatever, God is always with me.
So his bodily presence was about to go back to heaven on his ascension, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm with you always. You don't have to define me by the physical body the way we're with each other right now, but I'm with you no matter what. I'm always there. Okay, good one. Yeah.
Ditto.
Ditto to that one, Matthew 28.
Go and make disciples.
Okay. What makes that one especially comforting?
Yeah, everybody wonders what the meaning of life is. I think
Yeah.
that's the meaning of life.
Yeah, at the end of the day,
Yeah.
we want to get as many people to heaven as possible, and here's how you do it. Baptize them and teach them, and surely I'm with you always. So there you go. They kind of go hand in hand.
Suffer the little children to come unto me and forbid them not, for such is the kingdom of God.
All right, let the little children come to me and don't hinder them. Kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. Why does that bring comfort?
Because from a little child, from the time we're in the womb on, we are God's children.
Young and old, don't have to be a certain age for you to get Jesus or understand. Bring those little ones to me. I want them. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it'd be better to have a millstone hung around your neck and drowned in the depths of the sea. These little precious children are just as important to me as anybody. And so we hope churches always treat their children that way, right? They're not a nuisance. They're not annoying. Shut your kid up, right? No, Jesus wants them here. I always feel bad when a parent, I don't like to come because I don't want to, I feel bad when they make noise. And I get that, I get it. You know, you're embarrassed maybe, but Jesus wants you here. And if a congregation says we don't want you here, even if they don't say it, but they kind of, you feel that vibe, we got bigger issues. Other ones. Any on the negative side? Maybe the word negative is kind of, we don't talk that way, but any ones that you just think, hey, I never quite got that, or that saying of Jesus?
I got one.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the Old Testament, like you need to if an animal touches like Mount forever,
Yeah,
Yeah, where like if an animal touches the mountain, you need to stone
stone
it.
it. right.
Why?
Why those poor animals? Yeah, so what was the, the glory of God was so, this is such a perfect thing that, and it's not the animal's fault, but don't even let your, and remember back then animals were precious, right? That was commodity, that was money, your sheep and it's not like today where, well, a squirrel touched it and it died and you have to take it out and kill it. This is like your pocketbook you're talking. And you do not, so that's right before you give the 10 Commandments, right? I am holy, you are not, you do not get to come into my presence without sacrifice, right? So don't even let an animal come next to the mountain, and if it does, it has to be killed because it has now been defiled. It's like, but I think the point God was making was, when it comes to holiness, I'm here and you're not, and there's a separation that needs to be figured out, and that's what Jesus is gonna ultimately do, but that would hit people where it hurts. When it came, that precious little lamb you have, you gotta take it out and kill it. That big old bull you have, that's gonna be worth how much? Stone it to death, because it does not get to come into the presence of the Lord, even that. Ooh,
I
okay.
wonder how long it would take to stone a bull to
That's
death.
what I was
Yeah.
thinking too. Like, can't you just
All
like
right,
kill his
let's
piece?
go on.
Like, such an awful way to go.
Yeah, I'm thankful we don't live in the Old Testament anymore. It was-
I think, like in the story today, when Jesus tells everybody, don't tell anybody.
Which he knows they're going to. How can you keep
He
that
knows it's
secret?
going to get out, and he knows that,
Yeah.
So
Earlier,
why
Mark.
did he say that?
Yeah, and I think it honestly is, what happens, those few times people do hear about his miracles and see it, you often see them wanting him for the wrong reason.
Okay, yeah.
Feeding of the 5,000, right? This is great. I wish we could just make you our king. That's not why I'm here. I understand you
But they
think I'm
wanted
great.
to do that anyways, whether or not they
Right.
heard a specific story.
Right. So then when he says to Pilate, right, well, my kingdom is not of this world. Pilate just couldn't get that, because that's all he knows is worldly kingdoms. What do you mean you're a king? If you're a king, then you have a palace and borders and a crown, and well, that's not why I'm here. I'm not here just for the 80 years you live, and then that's all you need of me. I'm here for a bigger eternal purpose, but yeah, that's another difficult, and we're gonna talk about that one down the road.
And we are so blessed that we live past all this.
Right.
We can
We
look
can look
back
back, yeah.
versus the people that lived it
Right,
and didn't know, or we'd probably be in the same boat as them.
yeah,
If we were out in a ship and the winds and the waves came up,
yeah.
we wouldn't be any different.
Yeah, teacher, don't you care if we drown?
Yeah.
What a dumb question.
Yeah,
Of course he cares.
yeah.
What has he been doing for the past how long to show how much he cares for you? But they were just so wrapped up, all they could see was the winds and the waves and now Jesus, we know, can fix it and he's sleeping. There seems to be a disconnect. Why don't you care? I don't know if I told you, maybe that was at the Word, or maybe it might have been in the podcast, but it'd be interesting if you would just press pause right there in that story, in the middle of a storm, and then interview each of the disciples one by one. What's going through your head right now, Peter? Why did you just ask that? And to get his, and I bet you it'd be the same as you and I would say, well, I'm scared.
I'm scared to death.
Yeah, and I know he said that I'm going to be a fisher of men one day, and that hasn't happened yet. So really, if I really think about it, of course I'm not going to die, because he wouldn't make a promise and not keep it. And it's going to be hard to be a fisher of man from the bottom of the Sea of Galilee. So if I'm really thinking with my faith, I would say this is going to work out okay. But you're not thinking that sometimes when you're just surrounded by trouble and you forget about those promises.
Also, I've not lost one that you've given me.
Yeah,
Another one.
on Monday, Thursday.
About the sea, that painting, the famous painting of the sea and all the disciples, each, if you look at it closely, they're all, you can see their face, some are afraid, some are panicked, one turns away, and it's all a reaction to, your trust, your faith in
Sure,
God.
different reactions depending on their faith level. That story from last week, on the
Yeah,
water.
but who's that famous artist, the Sistine Chapel guy that did that painting?
Is that Michelangelo?
Michelangelo.
Yeah, him.
That dude.
That guy. He's also a Ninja Turtle.
Yeah, Ninja
He also lives in a sewer in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Any other difficult ones? And again, we're gonna get into a couple today, but these two today are, the first one especially, that Matthew 5 has been misinterpreted a lot, and I think it'll be good to talk that one through. Why did Jesus, in Jesus' day, why did people misunderstand him? Why do they still today?
Because they had human knowledge, they didn't have the knowledge of God that they could understand what he was trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah, you think of what he's saying about the Pharisees, though hearing they will never hear. They heard him, but they didn't. I don't believe it, you know. So 1 Corinthians 2, what does Paul say? We, however, speak a message of wisdom among the mature, but not the wisdom of this age, or the rulers of this age who are coming to nothing. We speak of God's secret wisdom, a wisdom that's been hidden, and that God destined for our glory before time began. None of the rulers of this age understood it, for if they had, they wouldn't have crucified the Lord of glory. This is what we speak, not in words taught by human wisdom, but in words taught by the Spirit, expressing spiritual truths in spiritual words. The man without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit, for they are foolishness to him, and he cannot understand them because they are spiritually discerned. So, yeah, without the Holy Spirit and the faith in our hearts, none of it makes a lot of sense sometimes. We just have to look around at the world to see that. She's not dead, but she's sleeping. And they laughed at him. You can see why. How can you say she's sleeping? She's dead. Just wait. Give me about 5 minutes here. But even at the end of the day, how many people still laughed at him? What else do I have to do to prove to you that I am who I say I am?
When the people were there listening to him and they said, yeah, here comes your mother and brothers. So many words he said, they're not his mother and brothers. These people,
Yeah.
mother and brothers, I have a hard time with that one.
Yeah, who is my family? This is my sister and my mother and my brother. Right? That back in those days, your family was everything, right? The closeness, family units, they all lived together. You might have had 10, 12, 15 people under one roof in those Jewish homes. And he's teaching the truths about the kingdom. And Jesus, your family's here looking for you. And what's the point he's making? This is my family. Like, so you think later on, I don't remember if this is in the study or not, whoever doesn't hate his father or mother is not worthy of me. I think, boy, that's a strong word. Am I supposed to go tell my mom I hate her? Is that his point? And from the rest of Scripture, you know, of course not. Honor your father and mother. Respect your parents. That's my point. Is not. But if you are comparing the two, and you are putting mom over me, or dad over me, or kids over me, there is no comparison. I always. So, strong word, but when it comes to heaven or hell, and I choose Jesus or my dad, choose me. This is my family, those who listen to my word. So yeah, that's a strong saying, but that spiritual truth is I am always number one, no matter what. Leave your father and mother, follow me. I think that one does come up in this study. Well, let's Matthew 5, and we're going to look at Deuteronomy 24 as well. The great majority of Jesus' words are clear and simple and understandable. As even in the last 5 minutes, how many other phrases from the Gospels you have no problem understanding? They're clear as day. And they were spoken mainly to Aramaic-speaking Jewish people living in Palestine 2,000 years ago. We have the Word of God preserved for us, but we read it in translations, and often with 2,000 years of interpretation shaping how we think. And I've said that sometimes, how differently would someone who was a native speaker of the language think about, if you've done any foreign language study, you know, a person who's a native speaker hears it and they think this, or you and I maybe as English speakers wouldn't quite understand the same word in the same way. That's just a nuance of, or someone coming to learn our language, how many idiosyncrasies does English have? What's an idiom in English that if you were a foreigner you'd have no clue what it meant?
Good grief.
Good grief. Good grief. I thought grief was sadness. How is grief good? And you're saying it all the time. Good grief.
Charlie Brown.
Huh?
Charlie Brown.
Oh, yeah. Deader than dirt. So dirt's alive. Deader than a doornail. I didn't know doornail had life. How can a doornail die to start with? We could go on and on, right? So you get the point. So usually translations, they're blessings, they're wonderful tools, but sometimes, for example, Matthew 5, we have to really dig into, okay, what was that word and how would it have been understood by those native speaking people? Because especially this one sure seems to put a woman in a bad place if she is divorced and it's not her fault, which is really the situation here in Matthew 5. So this is the Sermon on the Mount. The King James, Matthew 5:32, I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery. And whosoever shall marry her that is divorced, committeth adultery. Now here's the NIV 84. I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, causes her to become an adulteress. And anyone who marries the divorced woman commits adultery. So, what does it sound like Jesus is saying in those words? Chew on that for a second.
Women are doomed.
Well, yeah, so that kind of stinks. Now notice that if there's marital unfaithfulness, the word is porneia there, so any, the sleeping around, you brought a third person into the marriage that has broken apart the bond. He says that is a cause for a divorce. You can't, not that I want you to, right? If you can work through that and forgive, that's fantastic, but he would sign off on the divorce when there's marital unfaithfulness. However, this seems to be not the case. If you just put away your wife because you want to, causes her to commit adultery.
Yeah.
Well, she hasn't done anything wrong.
He's not getting any blame put against him.
Yeah, how come she's getting blamed for something you've chosen to do? There has been marital unfaithfulness in the NIV, right? Causes her to become an adulteress.
What about the guy she marries who doesn't maybe know anything about what happened previously?
Yeah, so how come he now commits adultery
Yeah.
if he has no clue about the past history and she doesn't really want to talk about it? And it just doesn't seem fair, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so a difficult saying of Jesus. It seems like this poor woman has been put into a situation where I didn't ask for any of this, and now I'm the adulteress? And if I get remarried, he's going to commit adultery, so then I probably shouldn't get remarried, right? If he leaves me and I haven't done anything wrong, but now I'm an adulteress, and now I'm going to make someone else an adulterer, yeah, like you see, I'm kind of stuck. If that's how you interpret this passage.
Yes.
Okay, so, difficult saying of Jesus, yeah. It is a difficult passage to translate. One of the verb forms he uses is rare. If you turn to Deuteronomy 24, someone wants to turn there. It has a,
What verse then?
I think it's verse 4. Deuteronomy 24:4. And actually, we can maybe read 1 through 4.
How can you read that teeny tiny?
I can't.
You say I can't?
But she's still looking
She
it up.
still has it.
It's just my prop I bring
Make her
with
read
me.
it.
Deuteronomy who?
Deuteronomy what? 24, 1 to 4. So, culturally speaking, the people Jesus is talking to would be more, this is what's in their head, right? The Jewish law, Old Testament, Deuteronomy, remember Deuteronomy's before they enter the promised land. Moses basically repeats what happened on Mount Sinai. He says, I just want to one more time tell you the laws of God, and then Moses is going to die and they're going to enter the promised land. So here's we're talking about marriage and divorce and remarriage, and he has some things to say. Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 4. Okay, thank you. What version do you have?
EHV.
This is the EHV.
When a man takes a woman and marries her, if she is not pleasing to him because he has found something indecent about her, and he writes her a divorce document and hands it to her and sends her out of his house, and she leaves and moves on and becomes the wife of another man, and then that second man hates her and writes her a divorce document and hands it to her and sends her out of his house, or perhaps the second man that took her as a wife dies. In these circumstances, her first husband, who sent her away, cannot take her again as his wife after she was stigmatized as impure, because that would be detestable to the Lord. You must not attach guilt to the land that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance.
Okay, and the verb we are looking at is stigmatized as impure. Okay, so that's one word in Hebrew. And there's only four, so verbs have forms, right? And this verb form in Hebrew, there's only 4 times it occurs in the whole Old Testament, so it's a very unique verb form. And it's kind of similar. There's not an exact equivalent in Greek in the New Testament to that verb form in Hebrew. So what word can we use that closely matches kind of what's happening here in Deuteronomy 24 when we're talking about someone being stigmatized as a, what was it, stigmatized?
Stigmatized as impure.
As impure. So how does that kind of change your view? If a woman and a man are married, and now in this case it says she did something that was displeasing to him. Now you remember in that culture it was very male dominated, and it didn't take much sometimes to do something that was displeasing to him. But let's say it was the guy's fault. He just didn't want to be with her anymore, and he made up some excuse. I just don't love her anymore, whatever. And now they write the certificate of divorce, and now she's been stigmatized as impure, it says, right? How does that change your perspective on the verb? Stigmatized as impure. Rather than she's become an adulteress, she's been stigmatized as impure.
Not sure it gets any,
What does it mean, stigmatized? If I've been stigmatized.
I'm not sure it's any better.
So if you're talking from the other person's perspective,
Yeah.
She's looked upon.
she's
as-
looked
She's
upon.
got a
her
reputation,
yeah.
Her reputation now. So
Yes.
what did she do
And
to
it
cause
makes
her
them
to
start
do that?
thinking,
Yeah, what
bad
did she
thoughts
do to
in their
cause
minds.
her husband to leave her? And again, especially in that culture, because women didn't have a ton of say, right? So if she must have done something.
Well, knowing sinful human nature, the guy could have, maybe she didn't do the dishes right.
Yeah, it wouldn't, honestly, it wouldn't take much.
Or, yeah. Could
We're
be.
not even bringing adultery into it at this point. It's
Right.
just she did something he didn't like, and he wrote up a certificate, I don't want to be with you anymore. And then she gets remarried, and what does it say? And then he dies, or he writes another one, and I don't want to be with her anymore either.
I think that's where the stigmatized comes in.
Yeah, so now I'm looking at her saying, okay, she's been married twice, both the guys left her.
One of them died to get away from it.
She really must be bad. Drove her to an early grave, him to an early grave. You're gonna start to wonder about her. Right? Now, you should just, if you have those questions, have a conversation, right? So, but you know how that works in real life. Oftentimes you don't. You just think things and don't bother having a conversation with someone. So now Matthew 5, back to that. It's a similar verb form. Maybe a better translation is what? Whoever divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, causes her to, rather than become an adulteress, how could you maybe say that a little differently with more of that stigmatized as impure concept? Because she has done nothing to commit adultery. She's the innocent party here in Matthew 5. Unless there's marital unfaithfulness, but there isn't. This is outside of that. So some have suggested maybe a better is causes her to be looked upon as an adulteress. That doesn't mean she's actually done it, but it's important what other people think about you. And okay, there's been a divorce, something's happened. And again, if you should have an honest conversation if you're really interested, and if she's willing to share with you. But how easy it will be for people to say, I wonder what happened that he left her. Especially if he leaves her. He must have left her for a reason. And even if the reason is I just don't love her anymore, which isn't a fair reason, people are going to wonder, people are going to think. And the point here Jesus is saying is divorce is a big deal. Don't just be willy-nilly when it comes to marriage. Because you're affecting not just your own souls, but other people's souls in this process. Now, Tom first, and then...
The example that you're using there, or the example that is given, I don't know which it is that she was married a second time.
Back in Deuteronomy, yeah. And he left her too.
Yeah. What if that wasn't the case? Does that change anything?
What part wasn't the case?
She got married a second time.
Oh, here in Matthew?
Yeah.
So that's the second question. Is she allowed to remarry? If you get divorced, are you allowed to remarry?
You're asking the question.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. It's gotta be clear here. Yes, if there's no fault.
Yeah, so that, and there's gonna be other passages we can dig into on that, but anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery, okay, well, what, again, if I'm going into this with the attitude of, here's this adulterous woman who did some, she's viewed as an adulteress now, right? And again, Jesus saying, just be careful with this stuff. Of course you can get remarried, especially when you're the innocent party. Now, it would be a different case if you're the guilty party.
Right.
We have Corinthians that talks about that. When you have been unfairly put aside, that doesn't mean, well, now you're done. You shut the book on marriage forever because a guy cheated on you and doesn't like you anymore, and even if he didn't cheat on you, he just doesn't like you anymore. So what is the age? You have the HV up? What do they have for Matthew 5:32? I'm curious how they change.
Yes,
If
but I
they
tell
change
you,
it.
whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality causes her to be regarded as an adulteress.
Ah,
And whoever marries the divorced woman is regarded as an adulterer.
Yeah. So this has become a messy personal situation that now people's perception is some kind of adultery has happened. And Jesus says, just be careful. Because not only your souls are being affected, but other people are paying attention. Other people are watching.
Outside of infidelity,
Desertion.
yeah, desertion,
Mhm.
how does for better or for worse enter into all this? So we
So-
say our marriage vows now, it's
Yeah.
for better or for worse.
Right.
Till death do us part.
Yeah.
So they did not have that back then?
They wouldn't have that in the marriage vows, no. I mean, leave your father and mother, be united to your wife. So, not in the same way, but,
I guess
It
I'm
was a
asking,
similar
where
concept.
did that come about?
oh, when did that come? Well,
When did that come about?
that's a good question. I don't know if I know when the vows we have today were written.
John, you gonna do your computer magic?
Yeah, Google have an answer. But Jesus quotes from Genesis, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother, be united to his wife. The two, so it's meant as a lifelong thing.
Become one flesh.
Yeah, become one flesh. What God has joined together, let no one separate. So from the beginning, this is meant to be this isn't just until you don't like him anymore.
Right,
And then,
right.
So,
no.
can I, okay, real quick, so, to answer your question, Jim, nobody knows exactly when.
I don't feel as bad. Nobody knows.
The earliest written form of what we kind of see as a traditional marriage vow is from 1662.
There you go. But the lifelong part, I would say, was written, baked in the cake all the way from
Sure,
when God
sure.
created man and
Yeah.
Hannah maybe, and then Tom. Hannah first.
I was just wondering, why is nothing, like, why is the man not stigmatized at all?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
not in the Bible, like, anything I've read, at least so far, I mean, not even close to, like, anywhere near the whole thing, but like, it's always like the woman's fault, nothing's ever put on the man.
No, Adam was in trouble too.
Yeah.
Okay,
Adam-
well, fine,
Adam
now.
was,
But-
Eve was never.
It's
No,
interesting that
well,
Adam, in the New
regarded
Testament,
as
Adam
equal,
gets
yeah.
all the blame, right?
Yes.
He never
The
says,
old
well, this
Adam.
was Eve's fault.
Well, Adam
It's
tried
Adam's
sneaking
sin.
out of it too. It's that woman he gave me, Lord.
Oh, yeah. So part of it is it was a very male-centered culture,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's just the reality of people he was talking to. But I think of the passage, and I think it's First Peter about the believing wife who takes an unbelieving husband, and there's times so there is, in that case, credit's given to the wife, right? It's the one who brings the husband in, and he can be saved through his wife. And but yeah, you're right. It was a culture where men, like it or not, were kind of here, and women were kind of here, and that's. But men get blamed plenty of time, and women get credit too. In Romans, Paul talks about all these women who he worked with and how great blessings they were, and that's kind of cool to see. It's like half the names are women. I'm so thankful for this lady, and she was such a help to me.
Timothy or Titus's grandmother, which one was it?
Eunice and
Eunice
Lois,
and
yeah.
Lois, yeah.
So, Tom. Yeah.
There is a place in the New Testament where God talks about the man departing, and then the wife is not under.
Yep. That's first. That'll be that desertion, right? The
Yeah.
other. So we say for divorce, Jesus talks about adultery and desertion, and that would be
Just don't
1
remember where it
Corinthians. Well, this will be the whole getting remarried thing. 1 Corinthians 7. If an unbeliever leaves, let him do so. A believing man or woman is not bound in such circumstances. God has called us to live in peace. So.
That's the one area where my grandmother, as well as she knew her Bible, she didn't know that.
No.
and, 'cause she wouldn't get married again because her husband had divorced her, or she had divorced him because he was unfaithful.
And she thought that was, now she can't ever get
Right.
remarried again, yeah, he broke the marriage vow, and that's not your fault in that case. Maybe Ephesians 5 helps a little bit. Do you see that on your sheets in the middle of page 2? We're talking about reputation here and being stigmatized or looked upon as. Among you there must not even be a hint of sexual immorality or of any kind of impurity or greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. And the EHV, do not let sexual immorality, any kind of impurity or greed even be mentioned among you, as is proper for saints. So again, just don't give people a cause to talk that way. Don't give people a cause to think that way. And in this case in Matthew chapter 5, that certainly is what is happening due to this divorce that has occurred. All right. Anything on that one more? So a difficult saying of Jesus, and this is where if you have like a Bible gateway, which we were talking about beforehand, I mean, you can pull up 50 different translations and see, okay, how did all these different English translations take that verb form? And some talk about, looked upon as, and some are more she has become. And if you say she has become, that puts a woman in a pretty difficult spot with God. If by no fault of her own, now she's an adulteress, even though she hasn't committed adultery. All right. Matthew 19. Incorrect interpretations can become so associated with Jesus' words, they're often accepted as fact, changing or obscuring Jesus' intended meaning. Following is a good example of this. Matthew 19, again I tell you, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God.
I first saw this as a hard saying.
Well, and I think what happens is in the 16th century, we'll talk about it. So the eye of a needle. There's a repeated tradition that perhaps you've heard. Anybody heard the tradition that, well, maybe Jesus might be saying this? Have you heard the story of what people think he might be talking about?
No.
Okay. So around the 15th, the what?
The camel gate?
The gate, yeah.
In
So
Jerusalem?
there's this story that if you get there late at night, the main gates were closed, but there was a smaller gate going into Jerusalem. Since the big ones were closed for protection and safety, what you would have to do is take all the stuff off of your camel, and then the camel would have to get on its knees, and then you'd have to drag the camel through the gate, which is going to be hard, right, because it's a smaller gate and a camel's a big animal, and then you drag your stuff along with it.
Yeah.
And the point Jesus is making here is it's easier to do that, and you have to get rid of your riches. If you want to really follow Jesus, you have to unburden your camel of the riches. That's what will get him through the gate. So there is no historical evidence that there ever was such a thing in Jerusalem. They had gates all the time, right? But this story about the camel gate didn't come up until like the 15th, 16th century. Because I think why is he's saying a very difficult thing here for anyone who has riches. It's easier for a camel, you can picture the size of a camel, to go through the eye of a needle. Anybody who sews can picture how big the eye of the needle is. Impossible, right? Those can't happen. Than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. Thoughts. Just right there. I mean, what does that seem to be
So
saying?
people think that if you're rich, you're not gonna go to heaven.
Basically.
Yeah.
Basically.
It's
yeah.
a sin to have money, it's a sin to work hard, to save, to
Right.
invest, have a financial plan.
It's just like when the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil is shortened to money is the root of all kinds of
Yeah,
evil.
and
My
that's-
neighbor was like that. I tried talking to her.
Anything.
I said, no, it's the love of money. No, money.
yeah.
Heck of a time.
Can you name some rich people in the Bible who were believers?
Abraham.
Okay.
Solomon.
Abraham, Solomon.
Nicodemus.
Now, Solomon struggled a little bit, but it seems like by the end of his life he was back on track. Nicodemus, right?
Joseph
Job.
of Arimathea.
Joseph of Arimathea.
Job was
Job.
very rich.
Job had a little stretch where he lost it all, but then he got double what he started with. Seemed like a pretty faithful guy.
David.
King David certainly had a lot of riches.
Lydia.
Lydia, yeah, the dealer in purple cloth.
And God gave them all those riches. You know, I mean, I will give you, I will bless you many, many times.
Yeah, so,
Right, well,
so I can't go to heaven because you've chosen to
That's
give me
right.
all these, I inherit all this money from someone and now I'm going to hell because I have all these riches, and that doesn't seem fair.
Only if you love those possessions so much that you love them more than God.
Yeah.
right.
So, oh, go ahead, John.
I don't know, my own interpretation of this is, it seems like with our sinful human nature, the more successful you are, the more you want. And people tend to fall into that trap. Where the more you get, the more you want, the more you want, the more you want, and that's the danger.
Yeah.
Like Betty says, if you love that more than God, then you're in trouble.
I'm reading my financial statement more than my Bible.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I sleep in peace because I know I have enough money to take care of myself rather than I know that my Redeemer lives.
But also the problem I have is, it says it's impossible for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, right?
It's easier for,
No, it's impossible.
yeah.
You can't get a camel, I don't care how hard you try, unless you do it one molecule at a time.
Right.
You have to go through an eye of a needle. So how does that jabby with the fact that some rich men can go to heaven?
Yeah, so let's read the context, because I think that's to your point. Matthew 19, 16 through 22. And maybe part of this is who Jesus was talking to when he told this, when he used this illustration. So I'm going to have Matthew 19, 16 to 22. And this doesn't really matter what version you have.
John does.
Yeah, Matthew 19,
John always does.
16 to 22, okay. Yeah, the rich young man. There was a man who came to him and said, "Teacher, what good thing should I do that I may have eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "Why do you ask me about what is good? Only one is good, but if you want to enter life, keep the commandments." "Which ones?" the man asked him. "You shall not murder." Jesus said, "You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not give false testimony, honor your father and mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself." The young man said to him, "I've kept all these. What am I still lacking?" Jesus told him, "If you want to be perfect, go, sell your possessions, and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me." When the young man heard this, he went away sad, because he had many possessions.
Okay. So maybe, in considering who Jesus is talking to, why would he make such a strong statement? An impossible thing for a camel to go through an eye of a needle, but what's the context?
Well, he knew the man's heart.
Yeah.
It's impossible to keep the law perfectly.
He thought he did. I've done all these.
He didn't have humility.
Well, I don't know about that, but
So he starts off on the wrong foot. "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He's already thinking, I got to do something. Okay, so
Yeah.
Jesus said, let's go down that rabbit hole a little bit. You got to keep the law. It's not hard. I mean, it is hard, but it's not hard to understand. Be perfect. I've been saying that since the Sermon on the Mount. Well, what commands? You know the rules. You know the commandments. Love God and love your neighbor, and there's all the ways you love your neighbor. Well, all these I've done. Okay. And Jesus could have stopped there and said, well, let's talk about that. And pointed out plenty of times where he hadn't done those things. But he knows his heart. And there's one thing specifically for you that I know you can't say, I've done this. Sell everything you got and follow me. And he just couldn't, right? He just had such a grasp on his worldly wealth that I can't imagine parting with it even to follow this good teacher. So now Jesus says, here's the thing about riches. And for someone like that, it's impossible for you to enter heaven if you have that attitude toward it. Just imagine trying to get the camel through a needle. It ain't gonna happen. So then the follow-up, so that doesn't mean we shouldn't have riches, and that's where you get into what we've all been talking about. Well, no, that's not the point. Plenty of rich people get to heaven, but the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people trying to get rich have fallen into a trap and all sorts of temptation. I think that's what you mentioned. What's the trap? Often I just can't have enough, and it's all I think about, and I need more. And it doesn't have to be that way, but the temptations for that person are way more when it comes to that versus someone who doesn't have it.
And then 2 verses later, Jesus says, with people this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. Following up on,
People,
That was after the eye of the can.
yep, 2 verses
Okay,
after
okay,
that.
okay.
Yep.
That puts a whole different perspective on it, doesn't it?
Fred?
people tend to need God more when they're in need.
Yeah.
Those that are rich aren't in need.
They don't
and
have a whole lot of
forget that they
need.
need God.
Yeah, what do I pray for when I already have everything in the world?
We find that out in this country in times of crisis.
Right.
I always think of 9/11.
Yeah, churches were pretty full that week and the week after, and after a while, we got comfortable again, and we're good. Just because we have a few minutes, anything more on that one? I think that kind of, again, not a sin to be rich, but just understand you're gonna have different temptations when you have a lot of stuff, and don't let your stuff become your God. So that Matthew 6, right? You can't serve two masters. That's on your sheets here. Either he'll hate one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You can't serve both God and mammon. That's just the Hebrew word for like stuff. Mammon is just your stuff. Not even just money particularly, but any kind of stuff can be mammon. The other one, this was kind of in the alternate lesson, but we talked about it in the women's study. I guess it's been a while now because we're going through Genesis, but that would be an interesting example. Cain, remember Cain and Abel, and after Cain kills his brother, God says to Cain, "What have you done? Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you're under a curse. You'll be driven from the ground. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops. You'll be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you're driving me from the land. I'll be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said to him, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, he will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. And the question has become, what is the mark of Cain?
Do not kill this man.
Don't kill your brother.
I've always often wondered that.
Yeah, so some have said, well, maybe this was like a skin color thing. He made him darker than everyone else to show this guy is off. I think, well, okay, I don't know. Was there some kind of a physical
Purple mark on the face.
purple, yeah, birthmark or something? And so all your mind can go there when you think, well, what was the mark of Cain? And maybe what helps is later on in Genesis 9, after the flood, the same word God uses for mark is the word he says, "I will put a sign in the sky to show you that there will," and what was the sign after the flood? The rainbow. So here is something that I'm going to show you, a mark, but there it's translated sign, that I'm going to keep this promise. So if you think about it that way, what might the mark of Cain have been? He says, I will, the Lord put a mark on Cain.
Big X.
So you could translate just as easily, the Lord gave a sign to Cain. That makes it easier. Maybe he had a vision, maybe he saw something that only Cain saw. Hey, I'm going to just assure you that what I just said is true. No one's going to kill you. You're going to be fine. You're going to be a restless wanderer because of what you did. But then you don't even have to get into, well, he made his skin darker, or he put a big X on his forehead, or he did some kind of deformity, that birthmark. Could he have done that? I suppose. But that just makes it easier to say, oh, the Lord gave him a sign. That happened all the time. The Lord gave people signs. And Cain said, okay, and off he went. So another example of translation, right, and how, okay, here's what the English says, but now here's the same word in Hebrew 4 chapters later, that the rainbow isn't like a birthmark. The rainbow isn't a dark skin pigment. It's a rainbow. It's a sign that God gives to show that he's never going to flood the earth the way he did again.
But how would other people know that
Yeah.
there was a
So
sign?
was the point for other people to know, or was the point for Cain to know in his heart this wasn't going to happen, and then just trust that God was going to keep his promise? You're going to be off limits. Trust me. Here's a sign to show you that, and now just trust me. Because what if he did have a birthmark? Like, don't kill me because God says so. You know what I mean? Like, what would the mark have been where someone was, oh, we can't kill him?
Well, it'd have to be something big like the Olaf cloud, because
Something
somebody
crazy,
comes to
yeah.
shoot him from behind,
Yeah.
he has a mark on the front, they don't know it's him, it has to be a time.
It would have to be some maybe magnificent, scary thing where, ooh, don't touch that guy. He clearly is. So it just seems kind of easier to say, yeah, God gave him a sign.
Maybe it was whoever looked on him, that never, the thought of killing him never entered their mind.
Well, yeah, because he's away from the land, he's away from his home, and he's going to be among his own descendants here soon enough. And he's worried.
Yeah.
He's worried that people are going to come out for vengeance. And again, God just says, don't worry. That won't cross their mind. You were going to say something?
No, just something along the lines Jim said.
Well, that's lesson 1. So some key points. Misleading translations. And, misleading, that's kind of a strong word, but I guess that's the point of why we do stuff like this, right? Or how often in a sermon where here's kind of what the original says, where sometimes English just doesn't quite bring across the meaning. Last week. Was last week we talked about the boat earlier, was that last night? My Sundays get confused. The storm, yeah, and it literally says, after he calmed the winds and the waves, they feared with a great fear. And I forget what the EHV translated it as. They were amazed. I think it said they were amazed. Well, they feared with a great fear. So does that mean they feared like, what just happened? It went from the storm to calm. Was it feared like, ooh, I can't believe I just said you don't care. And now, clearly you care, and I feel really bad for thinking you didn't.
Could fear mean respect?
Yeah, or it's a little bit of both. That just, this is the Son of
Like, I
God.
fear God, I respect God.
Yeah,
I'm not
that could
scared
be,
of my-
it could be that too.
They were filled with awe.
All right, filled with awe, yeah. So, or is it a little bit of all of them combined? That's what if I'm Peter, I respect him, I'm filled with awe, and part of me says, I can't believe I just accused him of not caring about me.
And I'm
And maybe it's a
scared.
little bit all three. Yeah.
The KJV would say, sore afraid.
They were sore afraid. Shepherds out in the field. So how many times do you have that where, well, here's what the English says, but there's kind of a different, I've told you about God's patience, and the word for patience is, he has a long nose. He has a long nose. What does that mean? Well, when you made sacrifices, right? But my prayer rise before you as incense, right? And he would talk about the smelling, the pleasing aroma, right? And so in the opposite sense of that word, when you do something that God isn't pleased with, it takes a while for the scent of that to get to his nostrils. So the word for patience, he has a long nose. He won't, he won't, what's the word? The verse is escaping me, but anyway, the point of the passage is he will be patient with you. His wrath won't last forever, right?
Very illiterate.
Yeah.
There's lots of.
But these cultures were more, talk about like the native Indians in Alaska, the Inuits, and they have all these words for things, but it's more, they're very hands-on-y, and they have life pictures, and that's how they developed their language, was based around the things in life. And English is just a little different than that. Especially Hebrew has a lot of those pictures of.
I'm very thankful I didn't have to learn English from
Yeah.
another language.
From what I hear, it's a very difficult language to learn. We talk about Jacob, right? The heel grabber, Jacob and Esau in the women's Bible study. Jacob meant deceiver. He was a charlatan. He was a trickster. And that's Esau. He lived up to his name when he deceived me. That's what Jacob is. And they would always call their kids stuff based on, it wasn't just a name because that's what Grandpa was called, but the names had meanings back then. Benjamin, son of my right hand. Yeah. Yeah, Isaac, he laughs, or laughter, because Mom was laughing, and so was Dad. Sometimes misleading or inaccurate interpretations need to be exposed before we can understand. I thought that was a cat. Crawling toward me. Before we can understand what Jesus is saying. What the heck's a cat doing? Not everyone is able to evaluate every translation or see through every interpretation. Don't be afraid, use the context to help shed light on Jesus' meaning. All right, so we begin this journey today. We're going to be doing this for a couple months here. Next week we won't, because it'll be the examination of the confirmads at 9:15. So we'll pick this up 2 weeks from now. Yeah, hopefully we'll have some fun.